Hey everyone, before we dive into today's thrilling story, make sure to hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and drop a comment below to let us know what you think. Share it with your friends so they can feel the tension, the action, and the suspense too. Now, saddle up, hold on tight, and get ready for a story that's about to pull you right into the heart of a storm you'll never forget. The sun dipped low over the horizon, painting the wide-open plains in streaks of gold and crimson. Dust swirled in the wind as a lone rider emerged from the distance, his boots crunching against the dry, cracked earth. The small town ahead seemed quiet, almost too quiet, as if holding its breath, waiting for something to break the fragile calm. The man's hat cast a shadow over his eyes, hiding the storm brewing beneath the surface. Every movement was deliberate, measured, a predator surveying its territory. The townsfolk had no idea the night would test them in ways they could never imagine. The main street was deserted, the old wooden buildings creaking under the weight of years and neglect. A saloon door swung gently, pushed by the wind, its rusty hinges groaning in protest. Inside, a few drifters nursed their drinks, glancing up briefly as the rider entered, then returning to their own shadows. The smell of whiskey, smoke, and old wood mingled, thick and heavy. The man's eyes scanned the room, catching subtle movements, tiny tells of who had power, who had secrets. Every gesture, every whisper told a story if one was willing to read between the lines. He dismounted with the precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times, the leather of his saddle creaking as he slid it off the horse. The animal snorted, pawing at the dirt impatiently, sensing the tension in the air. With a rope in hand, he secured the horse to a post outside, his eyes never leaving the saloon's interior. The barkeep, a wiry man with a crooked smile, straightened nervously, wiping his hands on a rag that had seen better days. He knew trouble when it walked through the door, and this man carried trouble like a second skin. Silence settled briefly before the tension stretched tight enough to snap. The rider moved to the bar, each step deliberate, the sound echoing softly in the quiet room. Conversations halted, eyes flickering in his direction, curiosity mingled with fear. He nodded at the barkeep, a subtle gesture loaded with meaning, and the man nodded back, knowing better than to ask questions. Behind the bar, bottles lined the shelves like soldiers waiting for orders. The rider's hand hovered just above his holster, a quiet warning to anyone who might think of crossing him. No one did. Not tonight. Not when the air itself seemed thick with anticipation. A door at the back of the saloon opened suddenly, and a woman stepped out, her presence sharp, her gaze unyielding. She was not afraid, but she understood the rules of this land better than most. The rider's eyes met hers, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, heavy with unspoken history. Every step she took was measured, the sway of her coat revealing strength and confidence. In her hand, a small piece of parchment fluttered slightly, as though it carried secrets that could topple kingdoms. The room seemed smaller suddenly, the tension almost unbearable as the two locked in that unspoken standoff. Outside, the wind began to rise, carrying with it the scent of rain and dust. A storm brewing on the horizon. Horses stamped, the air grew cooler, and shadows stretched long across the street. The rider leaned slightly against the bar, surveying every exit, every possible threat, every ally. He had come for a purpose, and nothing would sway him from it. The woman approached cautiously, her boots barely making a sound, yet every eye in the saloon followed her. Their silent exchange seemed to speak of betrayal, trust, and danger all at once. The air was electric, charged with the knowledge that everything was about to change. A sudden shout from the street outside shattered the fragile calm. The sound of hooves pounding against wooden planks, men shouting orders, and the clash of metal reached their ears. The rider's eyes narrowed, and the woman instinctively moved closer, her hand brushing against the small weapon she carried. Chaos had arrived, unannounced, and yet it felt like it had been waiting. The barkeep ducked behind the counter, muttering prayers under his breath. The saloon, once a place of quiet whispers, became a stage for the storm that had been building for days, its actors moving into place with tense anticipation. Shots rang out in the street, echoing like thunder across the plains. Dust kicked up, obscuring vision, and the rider made his move. With a fluid motion, he drew his gun, firing with precision that spoke of years of practice and survival. The attackers faltered, confusion spreading among them as they realized they were facing someone who didn't hesitate. The woman followed suit, moving with agility and awareness, taking cover and striking when necessary. The battle outside became a dance of life and death. The rhythm dictated by instinct, training, and sheer willpower. The saloon door burst open again, this time with a group of men seeking to take advantage of the chaos. The rider spun, his shots hitting their marks with a chilling efficiency. The woman moved to intercept, her movements swift and deadly. Together, they formed an unspoken partnership, a unity forged in necessity. The room seemed to shrink further, the walls closing in as the firefight reached a crescendo. Every breath, every heartbeat mattered. One wrong move could mean the end, and neither of them could afford mistakes. Amid the gunfire and shouting, a deeper truth began to surface. The riders outside were not acting on their own. They had a leader, someone orchestrating every move from the shadows. The woman's eyes flicked to the back door, sensing the presence of someone watching, waiting. The rider knew it too, his instincts screaming a warning. This was bigger than a simple street fight. It was a test, a trap designed to see who could survive and who would fall. The weight of that realization pressed down. But there was no time to hesitate. The moment demanded action, sharp and immediate. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the edge of the dust and shadows. A man tall and imposing, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. Commands barked out, men moved like puppets at his call, and the tension in the air reached a breaking point. The rider's jaw tightened, his focus absolute. Every shot he fired, every movement he made was calculated to protect, to survive, to dominate the moment. The woman moved alongside him, a silent partner whose instincts matched his own, their combined presence enough to tip the scales. The storm outside mirrored the storm within, chaos and control colliding in a deadly ballet. A sudden explosion of movement sent splinters flying from the wooden street. Men toppled, horses reared, and the ground shook with the force of desperation. The rider and the woman pressed forward, taking advantage of every opening, exploiting every weakness. Each decision was critical, the margin for error disappearing with every passing second. The crowd of attackers began to falter, their confidence eroded by the precision and ferocity of the defenders. Even in the midst of chaos, the rider maintained an almost supernatural awareness, reading threats before they fully formed. The wind shifted, carrying a new scent, something metallic, sharp and foreboding. The rider froze for a heartbeat, instincts screaming that the true danger had arrived. The woman noticed it too, her hand gripping her weapon tighter. Every man in the street seemed small suddenly, insignificant in the presence of this new, unseen force. It was the kind of danger that didn't announce itself, that moved with certainty and purpose. They had been caught in a storm before, but this felt different, as though the very land itself had turned against them, and survival would demand everything they had. The figure emerged fully from the swirling dust, a tall silhouette backlit by the fading sun. Every movement was deliberate, almost theatrical, and yet there was a lethal precision beneath it. The rider's hand hovered near his holster, eyes narrowing as he assessed the newcomer. The woman stepped slightly forward, her stance protective yet defiant. This was no ordinary foe. The presence alone demanded attention, respect, and caution. The town, once sleepy and lifeless, now held its breath as the tension escalated. Every observer knew that the coming moments would decide not only survival, but control over everything they had fought to protect. The newcomer's voice cut through the chaos, deep and commanding, carrying an authority that silenced even the distant wind. Orders barked out to the men who had been attacking, their confidence now replaced by hesitation. It was clear that they were pawns in a larger game, pieces moved by someone with a plan far beyond simple violence. The rider and the woman exchanged a quick glance, unspoken understanding passing between them. There would be no retreat, no negotiation. The only path forward was through, and every step required skill, courage, and an unwavering resolve to survive against overwhelming odds. A sudden whistle split the air, and the attackers shifted positions, reorganizing with alarming speed. The rider adjusted his stance, calculating every possible angle, every potential escape route. Bullets hissed through the air, striking wood and stone, sending splinters flying. The woman moved in synchrony, her reflexes flawless, responding to threats before they fully materialized. Every heartbeat felt stretched, as if time itself had slowed to emphasize the gravity of the moment. They were not merely fighting for their lives, they were battling the very notion that control could be seized from them without a fight. The newcomer advanced, the dust swirling around his boots, masking subtle movements that hinted at deadly skill. The rider fired with precise timing, bullets grazing the figure's coat without hitting directly. A warning shot that was meant to provoke and test. The woman's eyes flicked to a nearby alley, calculating potential flanking positions, analyzing the battlefield like a strategist. Each movement mattered. Each second was weighted with consequence. Even the smallest misstep could tip the balance, and both knew that hesitation would cost more than a life. It could cost everything they had worked for. A sudden loud crash came from the side street, drawing some attackers away, but the rider anticipated it and moved swiftly to cover the opening. The woman followed, fluid and silent, her presence a protective force alongside him. Dust and smoke filled the air, making visibility difficult, but instinct guided every motion. They were in perfect sync, a partnership forged in danger, refined through shared struggle. Each shot, each dodge, each decision was a calculated risk, and yet it all flowed like a deadly dance. The storm outside mirrored the storm in their minds, relentless, chaotic, and unyielding. The figure finally drew closer, revealing more of his features under the brim of his hat. There was a cold intelligence in his eyes, a calculating patience that unnerved even the seasoned rider. This was not just a man seeking victory. He was a force of nature, testing the limits of resolve and daring. The townsfolk, peeking from behind windows and doors, held their collective breath. Every person present felt the gravity of this confrontation. The air itself seemed to thrum with anticipation, a silent drumbeat heralding a clash that would leave no one untouched by its outcome. A shot rang out, cutting through the tension like lightning, grazing the edge of the newcomer's shoulder. He flinched, only slightly, his composure intact. But the rider and woman knew the true battle was just beginning. The attackers, sensing the shift, hesitated, creating openings that could be exploited, or could trap them entirely if misjudged. Strategy became paramount. Instinct alone would not suffice. The rider advanced, measured and unrelenting, while the woman provided cover, her sharp eyes scanning for threats hidden in the shadows. Every breath was a preparation for the inevitable confrontation. The newcomer smirked faintly, stepping aside just enough to reveal another hidden ally. A wave of men emerged, circling with intent, their weapons glinting in the last rays of sunlight. The rider's jaw tightened, knowing that this was no longer about defense. It was about survival and dominance. He and the woman moved as one, using every available cover, exploiting every distraction, striking with precision and patience. The street became a battlefield, alive with tension, smoke, and the sound of relentless motion. No sound went unnoticed, no movement uncalculated, every decision magnified by the stakes. The woman spotted a narrow passage between buildings, a potential flank route that could turn the tide. She signaled subtly, and the rider understood immediately. They moved together, silent and swift, approaching the enemy's side while keeping themselves protected. Bullets whizzed past, striking wood and stone, splintering debris around them, yet their focus never wavered. Timing was everything, and both were acutely aware that one misstep would be fatal. The confrontation was no longer just about strength or firepower. It was a contest of wits, agility, and the ability to read the battlefield before it read them. Suddenly, the newcomer appeared directly in their path, blocking the passage with an almost effortless command. His presence was magnetic, a force that drew attention and demanded response. The rider froze for a split second, recognizing that any action taken without consideration could be disastrous. The woman positioned herself strategically, ready to support or strike if the situation escalated. Every instinct screamed that the moment had arrived. There would be no turning back. The final moves of this deadly chess game were about to unfold, and survival would depend on courage, precision, and the ability to anticipate moves before they were made. With lightning reflexes, the rider fired, forcing the newcomer to step back. The woman followed, her shots precise and calculated, driving the remaining attackers into retreat. The street was littered with debris and spent bullets, the air thick with smoke and tension. For a heartbeat, the battlefield was silent. The calm after a storm that had tested everyone's limits. The rider and woman stood together, catching their breath, scanning for remaining threats, knowing that the true battle, confronting the mastermind, was imminent. Every eye in the town watched, every heart raced, anticipating the final confrontation that would decide who controlled the night. The newcomer raised his hands slightly, a signal to his remaining men, who began retreating strategically, covering his advance. It was clear he intended to confront the rider directly, testing his skill, his endurance, and his resolve. The rider adjusted his stance, eyes locked on the figure advancing, every muscle coiled for action. The woman moved slightly behind, ready to intervene if needed, her presence a silent promise of support. The tension was almost unbearable, the weight of the impending clash pressing down with undeniable force. Survival and victory rested on the next few critical moves. As the sun finally sank below the horizon, shadows enveloping the town, the final confrontation began. The rider stepped forward, unflinching, his gaze never leaving the newcomer. Every step was deliberate, measured, a display of confidence and readiness. The woman mirrored his movements, a silent partner whose precision and awareness were unmatched. The townsfolk watched in awe and fear, knowing that what would happen next would shape the fate of everyone present. The street became a stage, the night a silent witness, and the two forces collided in a confrontation of skill, willpower, and unyielding determination. Bullets flew, sparks ignited from steel striking steel, and debris swirled in the cold night air. Every move, every counter, every decision carried the weight of life and death. The rider pressed forward, his shots calculated, each one a message, each one a test. The newcomer countered with equal skill, a dangerous dance that tested limits, reflexes, and strategy. The woman flanked, her precision aiding the rider, together forming an unstoppable force that began tipping the scales. The night echoed with the intensity of the battle, a testament to resilience, skill, and the human will to survive. With a sudden, decisive maneuver, the rider disarmed the newcomer, forcing him back against the side of a building. The tension shattered in an instant, the threat neutralized, but the weight of the moment lingered. The woman moved forward, ensuring no hidden dangers remained, her gaze scanning every shadow, every corner. The remaining attackers fled, leaving the street silent except for the wind and the distant cries of retreating horses. For a moment, the town seemed to exhale collectively, the storm of chaos giving way to a fragile calm, a peace earned through courage, precision, and unwavering resolve. The rider lowered his gun slowly, his eyes still sharp, surveying the empty street. The woman stepped beside him, their silent acknowledgement speaking volumes. The night was quiet now, the echoes of violence fading, but the impact of the battle would remain. The townsfolk emerged cautiously, whispering among themselves, knowing that their lives had changed, their safety restored by two who had faced unimaginable danger and prevailed. The rider and woman mounted their horses, preparing to leave, but leaving behind a story that would be remembered, whispered, and retold for years to come.